as Scott said, my name is Dwight Hanson, and I was in the Marine Corps from 1987 to 1993. I just wanted to real quickly say appreciate my daughter and her boyfriend dialing in from Germany and Minnesota, my son and my other daughter dialing in, and then I see a couple of friends, especially Mike from Atlanta, but Randy's on the line, and just an honor to have Kathy join us, Walter's daughter. So hopefully as we go along, Scott, maybe other people might be joining in. I know you always watch your screen for people to join in, but that'd be great. So I'm going to start my presentation a little bit different before I get to the Gulf War. As many of you know, this is an important anniversary. The flag raising over Iwo Jima was yesterday, the 76th anniversary. And so real quick, I just wanted to start with about Sergeant Iron Mike Mervosh, who was in World War II, Korea, and Vietnam. He was combat wounded in all three wars and had 11 combat citations, just an amazing gentleman. He was a Marine, and that picture of Trinity and him on the left was at one of the anniversaries of Pearl Harbor. And what's interesting about that picture is he's got the dip in his mouth, the cigars in his pocket, and the spit cup in Trinity's lap. And, I just thought that was pretty funny, but a Marine's Marine. And the next one is one of our distinguished members that we had is Walter Ehlers. Actually, we commemorate Walter's on Friday, the 20th was the day that we lost Walter back in 2014. And, he just had a heart for kids. And that's a picture of Sterling and Jessica with him at his house. And then he came and spoke at Mariners Christian School, that picture on the right. And then the kids and I did go to his services out there in Riverside. And if you ever get a chance to look up his citation, it's pretty amazing. We do have stories on Walter, but just an amazing gentleman. And I just wanted to also bring his attention, as the anniversary of his passing and just how much he meant to us and the Freedom Committee. So with that, I want to go into starting out about the Marine Corps. So everyday life in the Marine Corps back before the Gulf War was, the top left, you got a picture of us going out to eat dinner together as a work center. We'd go out and do this occasionally. Athletics were big in the Marine Corps, so I played volleyball for the Marines. I also played football for the Marine Corps. You see that picture. We didn't have, there wasn't many TVs or things like that, so we'd watch TV in the lounge, the barracks lounge, so people would hang out in the lounge every night pretty much and, gather there. And then once in a while we do training. So up on the right you see some of us about once a quarter, about once a quarter we'd go out and do like forced hikes and things like that, but not necessarily things with with weapons and stuff. We'd qualify every year, but not all the time. We'd also have mess nights. So you see the mess nights there, where that was a tradition going back to the English, where you get together and it was just a time of camaraderie with the Marines. And then on the right is my job in the Marine Corps. So that is right there on the right is me getting my certification to be an aviation electrician. And I was an aviation electrician, was my primary MOS in the Marine Corps. And I did that all the way through. And so that was the day that I graduated from my aviation school. So, and then this is where I worked. So the Work Center for Avionics, if you see that picture on the left, these vans, which were very easy to move and mobile, that's what we did. We fixed the parts that went inside the airplanes. And on the right, you can see those two gentlemen standing outside one of the work centers. They were white vans, and they were about maybe 8 feet by 20 feet long. And they did this so they were easy to move and everything else, which came into use during the Gulf War, or wherever they have to go, they can pick these up and move them very quickly. So that was life in the Marine Corps before Saddam Hussein decided to invade Kuwait. And our commandant of the Marine Corps from 1987 through 1991 was General Alfred Gray. And his quote was, every Marine, first and foremost, is a rifleman. All other conditions are secondary. And he was the first commandant of the Marine Corps to take his picture in his battle fatigues and his camis. And so he that kind of set him apart from all the rest of the gentlemen, that served as commandant. And it was kind of foreshadowing because when Saddam Hussein decided to invade Kuwait, on August 2nd, 1990, it was kind of like he knew what was going to happen. So from August 2nd, 1990 to February 28th, 1991 was the Gulf War, Desert Shield and Desert Storm. Actually today, February 24th, is the 30th anniversary of the beginning of the ground war. And I have in there October 1991 in parentheses, because that's when I returned to CONUS, to the continental U.S. So I was there from February all the way through October, is when I returned. So, so in seeing this, you can see that there were 39 countries. This map's a little hard to read, but I brought it up just to show you the mass of material and people involved. There were 39 countries involved. 28 had combat forces. There were approximately 670,000 Allied troops against, of which 425,000 were the United States troops, and Iraq had 540,000 troops engaged. Now, because of this, and the fact that Iraq had been at war for 10 years with Iran, and they had the fourth largest standing army in the world, the Marine Corps started employing every Marine a rifleman. And so here is a picture, actually, of my mom. It's the only picture I have from this. She came before I went over to the war, and this was the Operation Desert Storm combat replacement training. So the Marine Corps thought that they were going to take heavy casualties, and so they started taking Marines from all different MOSs, military occupational skills, and training them up for combat. And so this included attack, formations, firing the saws, different weapons, so familiarization with the weapons that we would need to use. There were a total of 16 combat replacement companies formed for the Marine Corps. Of these, 14 made it over to Saudi Arabia, and we were CRC 13, Combat Replacement Company number 13. Now, our job would have been to fill in for injured and killed Marines as the war went on. But fortunately, and thank God, the war was short and there weren't that many Marines killed or injured, so they didn't need to use the reserves that the Marine Corps had sent over behind the lines for the Gulf War. They had been involved, in a war for 10 years, and they were battle hardened. So, and now what we have, so they did that familiarization with us now, but in the Marine Corps now they have MCT, which is Marine Combat Training after boot camp, and that's 4 to 6 weeks of training if you're a non-combat MOS or infantry, and then they have SOI, the School of Infantry, for the O3 fields that they go through, and that's what Marines do now, still keeping with the every Marine is a rifleman. Of course, getting there was not always easy. This isn't them going, but you see the soldiers are coming off that airliner there, right? On the left, that's the civilian airliner, and on the right, you see Marines coming in on military aircraft with their packs and everything. So during the Gulf War, over 500,000 troops were transported from the United States by air. The other 140,000 or whatever, were taken by ship. But that included 600,000 tons of cargo that was flown to Saudi Arabia for the Gulf War. So they had to use a lot of military, but a lot of civilian aircraft as well. And so you saw a lot of civilian aircraft. You saw a lot of civilian vehicles over at the Gulf War because of the amount of military people that were there. Now, this next slide is a slide of the area, and I want to point out a couple things. Hopefully, you can see my pointer. Scott, can they see my pointer?
Yes.
Okay. So this is Kuwait, where Iraq came down into Kuwait to attack. You'll see the left side over here is the whole entire border of Iraq. So Iraq, most of it borders the Saudi Arabia. Very little borders. It borders all of Kuwait, but very little of Iraq borders Kuwait. So, most of it's not on the Kuwaiti border. If you look down here where my cursor is, that's Al Jubail. That's actually where I was stationed. So there's Al Jubail. And you come down, you come down from Al Jubail, you have Bahrain, which is right here, and that'll be important later on in my presentation. And then over here to the right is Bahrain, which is an island off the coast of Saudi Arabia, and we still have naval weapon or naval forces still in that area. And so this is how the map looked for the Gulf War. If you go to the next one, this shows you, if you look in the black area, if you look in the black area to the right at the bottom, you'll see the battleships Missouri, Wisconsin, the aircraft carriers Midway and Ranger down there. You can make those out. If you go over to the left in the Arabian Ocean, you'll see the aircraft Saratoga, Kennedy, and Theodore Roosevelt. And so there were 6 battle carrier groups engaged during the war. They shot almost 300 Tomahawk missiles and 35 cruise missiles during the initial stages of the attack from January 17th through February 24th before the ground. And this is on the left is what a battle carrier group looks like. That's the USS Midway's carrier group. The Midway was the oldest aircraft carrier, but it was in command of the entire operation from the sea. And so that was, and on the right is the Midway. You can visit that, of course, down in San Diego still, but that's the USS Midway. And also what's interesting is, actually, you know what, the Missouri also was engaged. And the Missouri was put into commission during World War II in 1944. And they actually mothballed it in the 70s and 80s, but then they brought it back, and it served during the Gulf War, and then was finally retired and decommissioned in 1992. It now is in port at Pearl Harbor, right by the USS Arizona. Thousands of flights came from these aircraft carriers as well, along with the air resources that were on land as well. But there were thousands of sorties flown from these aircraft carriers. Well, this is German. This is General Storm Norman Schwarzkopf, and he's kind of famous because he actually had written a complete battle plan for if there had ever been an issue with the Middle East, and so he had a plan when this all started, and it was kind of 4 phases. The first phase was a deception, and what that was to make them think that we were going to come and attack just Kuwait. So we built up our naval forces where they could see them, and did a lot of maneuvers in front of where they were. So Iraq ended up massing their troops on the Kuwaiti, Saudi, and Kuwaiti Red Sea shore is where they massed probably 3/4 of all their defenses. Then he had a thing called the Hail Mary, and what that was is moving tons of troops once we started to attack without them knowing. And he actually was pretty successful with this. I'll talk about that in just a minute. But he was successful in doing this because what happened was during the air war, we were able to take out basically any of the eyes that they had in order to see what we were doing. Now, and so that's what he did. Now this map here will show you on the right, if you see Kuwait City, Kuwait, you'll see that's where we massed a lot of our ships and did a lot of maneuvers. And then if you look to the bottom right, you'll see the 1st Marine Division and 2nd Marine Division and Saudi forces. So they massed them there, and so they made sure to make a lot of noise. So they really concentrated their troops there. You can see those boxes with the X's. That's the Iraqi forces. Now, what Iraq did was to the left, to the west, they did have divisions out there, just not as much. They were much less. They were sparsely populated out there. So once the air war started, and we were able to start to make it so their planes couldn't fly anymore. What General Schwarzkopf did is they moved over 300,000 troops to the west. So they moved over 300,000 troops to the west, which allowed them to bring huge resources over to the left, and the Iraqis did not know that we were doing this. The units engaged. Let's see real quick. those units to the left also had 60 days worth of ammunition and supplies. So they made sure that not only the units to the left, but the ones on the right had 2 months worth of supplies, that they basically could conduct war operations for 2 months without being resupplied. That includes food, ammunition, and everything else. That goes back to how the tip of the spear, 90+% of the military supports the tip of the spear. And in order for these ground troops and tanks and all those and to do their job, there's 90% are supporting the ones that are up in the front, with food, with ammunition, and all the things that they'll need to create take out a successful operation. So you can see, and basically that's kind of the plan. So if you kind of remember that as I go through, you'll see as we go how this planned and how they did a left motion around them, so they flanked them on the left, and they came around and trapped the forces so they couldn't escape. What Schwarzkopf called that was he moved on all three fronts, where the 7th Cavalry breached the barriers and pushed into Iraq, followed by the British 1st Armored Division, and that's right there in the center bottom of your screen. And then the Marines pushed towards Kuwait City. They encountered heavy artillery fire, mines, barbed wire, booby traps, and fire field trenches, because that's where they had massed most of their divisions. But they also had broken the will of them to fight. So as the Marines advanced, the Iraqi troops began to surrender in mass because they didn't want to fight anymore. So the deception worked because they thought that's where we were only attacking. In the meantime, you had all these divisions, armored divisions and everything in the west, sweeping into Iraq, almost unopposed, and coming behind the Republican Guard and all their tank assets. And then he called it tightening the noose, and that's when all these resources over the 4 days combined together to squeeze it down so they couldn't get away. And that's where you see that, and he called that closing the gate. So Schwarzkopf called that closing the gate. Now, helicopters were engaged from the very beginning. Here we have the CH-53, the CH-46, and the Apaches. And what's interesting, I don't know if a lot of you remember when we tried to go in and save the Iranian hostages, the American hostages. There was a mission flown like this, so there was a lot of apprehension in doing what they did, and because of what happened in Iran during the American hostage crisis. So what happened is on the morning at like 02 in the morning on the 17th of January 1991, when when the air war started, they had they had 6 Apache helicopters fly 50 feet off the ground for 130 miles to 2 radar stations that were inside Iraq. And they had to hit both these radar stations at the exact same moment so they couldn't warn each other. And in doing this would blow a 20 to 40 mile hole in the radar detection for Iraq to see what was going on. Well, they did that, and they successfully hit both the radar installations. They shot over 27 Hellfire missiles at those 2 radar installations, 100 rockets, and 4,000 rounds of 30 millimeter ammunition, completely destroying both sites. The helicopters were able to fly higher than coming back. They didn't have to be 50 feet off the ground on the desert. And they had to be careful because, you fly by sight a lot over there. The GPS and a lot of the advanced navigational tools that we have now, they didn't have back then. And they had to watch out because there are sand dunes over there that they used for, locations that are a couple hundred feet high. So they had to be careful flying in at 50 feet. But coming back, they were able to fly higher, 500 to 1,000 feet. And as they were, the first of 900 planes and jets came flying across through that gap in the radar, that 20 to 40 mile gap, and 900 planes began attacking Baghdad. And maybe you remember Wolf Blitzer saying, "The skies above Baghdad are illuminated." Well, it was because of these helicopters and what they did that all those airplanes and jets were able to start flying in the combat missions. And after the first couple days of the air war, were basically relatively unopposed. For you guys in Vietnam, here's some pictures of F-4s that fought in Vietnam. There's the F-18s, there's the Warthog, and of course the B-52 for heavy bombing. There were over 18,000 sorties flown during the Gulf War from January 7th. Well, they were flown before January 17th, but 18,000. And they relentlessly bombed Iraqi and Kuwaiti targets for those 6 weeks. The coalition had 2,250 combat aircraft. 1,800 of those were the U.S. The Iraqis only had 934 combat aircraft, but only 550 were operational. And like I said, most of those were knocked out in the first few days of the war. We dropped over 88,000 tons of bombs during the air war. There were 210,000 dumb bombs, so basically, like you see them coming out of the B-52. So B-52s dropped 210,000 dumb bombs, ranging from 250 to 500-pound bombs. There were 9,000 smart bombs dropped. Those were the ones where they would show like the video of them hitting a target. That was real popular to show back when the war was going on. There were 6,000 air-to-ground missiles fired during the 39-day air campaign. And there were 15,000 air refueling in-flight missions as well. So we were able to keep our aircraft up there flying. The A-10 Warthog in the top right shot over 782,000 rounds of depleted uranium during the Gulf War, and most of that came to bear when they were battling the tanks, which I'll talk about here next. But what that does is that allows those rounds to penetrate armor. That's why they use the depleted uranium. There were also over 2,000 anti-radar radiation missiles fired at Iraqi to help blind them. And then that completely blinded them, and that allowed for the success. You remember that map of moving almost 300,000 troops with almost without detection, or they were without detection, all the way to the west to do the flanking movement. Now the tanks were a huge deal. This is one of our biggest concerns because Iraq had their tank numbers were 4,200 tanks that they had. Most of these were Russian made, and so during the war there was 4,200, but we were able to destroy 3,700 of those 4,200 tanks. So we destroyed almost 90% of all the tanks they had in combat. Compare this to the losses that we had for our Abrams tanks. We lost a total of 25 Abrams tanks. And when I say lost, that doesn't mean destroyed. That means decommissioned, that they couldn't continue the battle. But not one Abrams tank was destroyed. 7 were hit with friendly fire. But like I said, thankfully, because of the armament on the Abrams tanks, when they were hit by the T-72s or the T-66s, none of them got destroyed. So that was a really good thing. And you see that the soldier standing on top of that tank without the turret on. Well, what happened is we used these stable rounds that would go into the Iraqi tanks, and the way they were designed when they went in there is they literally popped the turrets off the tanks. So many of the tanks that got hit ended up having their turrets pop off, and it's the design of the round that would penetrate them, and that's what you would see it. Now, the Iraqis were used to fighting against human waves from the Iranian war, right? So while they had been at war for 10 years, they had never experienced, and again, they called blitzkrieg, the lightning war, the rapid deployment and how fast the United States would move. So one of the disadvantages of those Russian tanks were they were hand cranked, literally you guys from World War II. So a shout out to George Emerson. So George Emerson remembers if the landing gear didn't go down, you had to start cranking it. And that's kind of how they moved these turrets in most of these tanks. And so when they would come in contact with an Abrams, they'd start trying to turn their turret. Well, the Abrams tank could turn in maybe a second or less, and also put rounds down range at 4 seconds a round down range. And so the velocity and firepower that we could put down range against these tanks was just overwhelming for them. So they were really caught off guard by this. So, I was one back. So, one of the big concerns we had was right there. You see the biological, and I'm going to bring this up. If you look at if you can see mine. This is actually a gas mask that I ended up getting. It was from over there. It was a Iraqi gas mask, and they all had their gas masks. And so not only that, but this is their quote unquote helmet. So this is the helmet that's basically like a helmet that you would have on a construction site. So these are a couple of pieces that I came back with. Now, the gas we knew we were concerned about because Saddam had gassed his own people, the Kurds, and we saw horrific images. I didn't want to include any of them, but horrific images of them, gassing the Kurds and entire villages. And so that was a huge concern going in. So we all had our gas masks, and we were trained in the NBC and biological. Now, what's funny, there's a funny side story to that. Not that that's funny, but when we were getting ready to go overseas at 29 Palms, they kept throwing CS gas at us all the time. They kept throwing the CS gas, lobbing it in. And they booby trap our stuff as well. So I remember one time when we were getting ready to go, one of the Marines in my unit, he sat down to eat his chow against his pack. Well, they had put one underneath his pack, and he was completely enveloped in CS gas. You couldn't even see him. And he was so angry because we had been gassed like 15 or 20 times that day that he just sat there and ate his entire chow while he's surrounded with a cloud of CS gas, and he was leaking from his nose and his eyes, and it was pretty bad. But he was very angry. He just sat there with a a screw you look on his face and just ate his entire evening chow without moving. So we were kind of laughing about that. That was pretty funny. So that was a big concern, was the biological. And you can see the smoke. I'll come back to the smoke in a little bit, but you can see the smoke from the oil fires. They were everywhere. And here's some more pictures. So the oil fires kept going. Saddam lit 610 oil wells on fire. And then at the ports of Kuwait, they dumped over 11 million barrels of oil into the Gulf. They just opened up the spigots and just were pouring oil into the Gulf just to create havoc because they thought the Marines were going to come ashore, and so they were just trying to do everything they could. So those fires were actually put out by a famous American, Red Adair or something, I believe, and he used dynamite to blow those up, to blow out to get rid of the oxygen and everything so that the fires would go out for the oil. But here, this picture here also shows an Abram in the bottom left, so that's the Abrams firing. You see some captured equipment. I'm sitting on a piece of artillery there, and then on the right is a T-71 tank, I believe, that had been captured and taken back. And here's the oil fire. So this is me on the top right. I'm in Al Jubail, so I'm about 100 miles south of the Kuwaiti border, maybe 120 miles south of the Kuwaiti border. And this is what the sun looked like for 2 or 3 weeks after the Gulf, after Saddam started lighting the fires. I remember, we were at these barracks at the beginning, and there were Marines and soldiers coming down that had been up in the front, and their clothes were literally drenched with oil. And so I still remember that and how much oil there was. That's a mosque. Same thing with the oil, and then that F-18 there, you can see just the amount of oil fires there. In our jackets, for being over there and reporting, they said being near the oil fires was equivalent to smoking 12 packs of cigarettes a day until they got them extinguished. So that was something that that was pretty amazing. Now, if you know, the one thing that Saddam had that actually kind of worked was the Scud missiles, and so with the Scud missiles, they fired 81 Scud missiles into Saudi Arabia from Iraq and Kuwait. And when we got there, when we landed, they warned us about these Scud missiles, and as you're getting off the plane, they said, well, if you hear air raid sirens and you're on the plane, sit back down, we're going to take off. And if you're off the plane, run to a bunker. And so it was kind of like you got to the door, and it was a little bit how fast do you move. But there were 81 launched into it, and they would starting with the ground war, you started hearing the air raid sirens all the time. And there would be air raid sirens for incoming, and then there would be air raid sirens for all clear. And a lot of times you would wake up to the all clear sound and miss the fact that there was a incoming, or they hadn't warned you that an incoming was. But we had kind of grown kind of tired of this, and when they first started hearing the air raid sirens, we put on our gas masks and try to get to a bunker or be inside a building with our backs against the wall. But after a while, we kind of grew lazy and just didn't really think anything of that until the 26th of February. On the 26th of February in Bahrain, so if you remember that map, going back to that map, probably 150 miles south of the Kuwaiti border, Bahrain, one of the Scuds hit an army barracks, a building that was used as an army barracks. And when it hit that army barracks, it killed 28 soldiers and wounded over 100. And that was the largest loss of life in one event and the most wounded in one event during the Gulf War for the Allies, and definitely for the U.S. And so we took it a lot more seriously after that. But it was definitely something that got our attention, and that's the one thing that did work were those Scud missiles. And you remember the Patriots being deployed trying to defend against those. If you remember the tightening of the noose, there was no place to go. So there's a famous picture here, and they call it either the highway to hell or the highway of death. And basically this is about 2,200 military and civilian vehicles that tried to escape back up to Iraq from Kuwait, and they were cut off. Now, the death and destruction from this was complete. The death wasn't as bad as it could have been. Again, going back, and the fact is because of the United States and our allies and how we fight wars. So when they started to destroy this convoy of 2,200 vehicles, they took out, of course, the front and the back to store them, to stop them. Well, when that happened, people started trying to escape, to run to the desert. Well, we concentrated our fire on the convoy, destroying all 2,200 vehicles. We didn't try to concentrate on the people that went out into the desert. If they ran out and were running away and got far enough away, they were outside the line of fire. And so while there were 2,200 vehicles with thousands of Iraqis trying to get away, the death toll was well below 1,000 because of that, and us not wanting to, go and shoot people that are running or trying to surrender. So after, there's some pictures here that are a combination, but this is the living quarters during the Gulf War. And on the left there, I show that picture. That's when we were actually taking stuff down, but you can see me holding, that's a full tent actually. And I'm holding one of these huge tents, and the wind is so strong, and the sandstorms were just amazing. In fact, there was the sandstorm one time, and I woke up in the morning in one of these tents that you see on the bottom left, and I looked across at the Marine across from me, and we had our bug nets over the top, and I said to him, I go, dude, you're white. And he goes, what do you mean I'm white? Because he was black. And I go, you look white. All the sun, the dust and sand had blown through the tent, and he literally looked ashen white. There was so much dust and sand. The other thing I'll remember is, it being 100 and whatever, 15 degrees or whatever, and you'd go 3 tents down to the Air Force tent, and it would be sealed, and you'd open the door, and they'd say, shut the door, you're going to let the air conditioning out. So, we always gave the Air Force a hard time about that, but they said, well, you could have joined the Air Force, you didn't have to go in the Marine Corps. So, but that's, on the top right, you see that's everything I came with me. I've got my sea bag on the front, then I've got my pack that I would have carried into if I would have been deployed up front to the war, to the actual front lines. And then Hussein's Asylum, that was a place that we could go in and get get the canteen to get drinks and sodas and stuff like that. Like I said, we left, we were there until October almost. So we were there 6 to 7 months after the war ended. So we actually got some R&R time. And so on the top left, you see, that's my friend who's on the phone, on the call right now, Mike King. We went out to a buffet dinner one night, the two of us, And the thing that stands out in our minds there is the delicacies that they had. One of the ones was lamb brains. And so I guess that's a delicacy in the Gulf, and we had lamb brains. Then on the 4th of July, we were able to go to a pool, and we had a belly flop contest. And so that's on the 4th of July. We got the day off work. We were working 12 on, 12 off, 7 days a week. But on the 4th of July, we all got off, and we were able to go to a pool. And then on the right, I call that the local wildlife. So at one of the camps, they had a camel that you could take pictures with and whatnot. And I'm feeding that thing orange crushed soda. So anyhow, we got to take pictures with the camels and everything. So that was fun. So July 4th was 5 months after the war had ended. One of the things that we did right after the war ended was I was a customs inspector. And while I'm posed there on the left with weapons, a lot of AK-47s and other weapons on the left, that's not primarily what we were concerned with. We were concerned about pests getting into the United States, pests like the Mediterranean fruit fly, boll weevils, different things like that, things that have come in from other countries. And so that's what we were looking for. So on the right, you see the Marines emptying out all their stuff. Another big concern was munitions like hand grenades. We didn't want people, taking hand grenades back, especially in the planes. And my little pitch that I gave when I was a customs inspector, because we briefed them before they came through, this is kind of your time to turn in. Anything you turn in right now, you won't get in trouble for. If we catch anything, you're going to get in trouble. And we literally had them dump out their entire sea bags. And so what I would tell them is, you made it all the way through this war. We were fortunate that, it was over in 4 days, and the loss of life was as little as we thought. It was tragic that we lost 145 battle deaths, but compared to what it could have been much greater. And I said, you don't want to be the guy, and there's a plane flying back to the United States, and some idiot has a grenade or some kind of munition on it, and all of a sudden it blows a hole in the side of the plane, and 350 Marines or soldiers go down because of stupidity. And that usually worked pretty good. The one thing we did do, though, that may have been a little bit dishonest, is we told them their beef jerky and pudding and stuff couldn't go back. We figured they didn't need it. We wanted it back where we were, so we tried to take their snacks as well. That was a little dishonest, but I don't think we have to take it too much for that. So the next thing that we did was, after we did customs, sending everybody else home, is we did this is called bomb racks and contractors. So we loaded all the aviation ordnance that we didn't drop and other materials. So on the left, these are the contractors that helped us load the ships that came. And we had a softball game at the end. This was in August. That's why everybody's sweating, or September when we left. And on the right, those are racks of bombs. Those are racks for bombs. And this picture, this is a forklift at the bottom of a ship. This is called the Hanjin Jetta, this ship. And they told us we were going to load the Hanjin Jetta. It was going to be the only ship that we loaded, and then we'd get to go home. Well, it wasn't the only ship we loaded. It was a ship we loaded, but we loaded it twice. We loaded it, went back to the United States, unloaded, came all the way back to Saudi Arabia, and we loaded it again. So we loaded ships for 4 or 5 months. And those racks that you see there hold the bombs, and I'll show you a picture here in a second of that. But that's the very bottom of the ship. This next picture, you can see we're building a deck on the right, a deck over those bomb racks. So that was probably a 5,000 square foot deck. And what we did on top of that was put on the left, the pictures on the left are different missiles that we didn't drop, and they're in their own crates. So we would go down in and we'd have to brace these missile crates that we had, and so you see that on the left. I'm down in the hole trying to build braces there. The next slide is so on the bottom left you can see those are the racks that the bombs. So those are actually bombs that we didn't drop. And so those are the bombs we didn't drop, but those racks, if you go back up to here, you can see how many, again, I said, we dropped 110,000 dumb bombs. So not all of them got dropped, you can see on the left there, but those are all the racks from those dumb bombs that got dropped. On the top left, we took turns being chow drivers. So while the military, at first we'd have to drive to the military base to get chow. So I was able to drive this Jeep for a week or two, and we took turns doing it. And our job was just to go get chow and bring it back to the port. So that was pretty good because it was nice. You didn't have to be sweating working on the dock. To the right, those are Sparrow missiles, and the Sparrow missiles on the right are what they were fired. But what happened was you can barely see the forklift behind it, but those dropped off the forklift onto the ground. And unlike Concord during World War II, when they dropped the bombs, they were loaded, they were armed back then. They're not armed, and so that's why this picture of me on the left joking around with the guy with the sledgehammer, he could have hit that with the sledgehammer. It's not going to go off. They have to be armed. And on the right, the Sparrow missiles, those also have to be armed. Now, so they weren't loaded and they weren't going to go off. Now, I don't know what that says for the guy in the forklift. I think he had a load somewhere when he dropped them, but that pretty much scared him. But they evacuated the whole port, that area of the port when he dropped those Sparrow missiles. How hot was it? Well, if you look at this picture on the left, you can see that's me in my boots and utes when we would load the ship, and you can see how dry that is. My camis and my t-shirt. On the right is, if you can look, that's sweat. That's not water or anything else. So they kept telling us wait till August. Well, on August 1st, it was on the deck of the ship, it was 118 degrees. The ambient heat coming off the ship of the deck of the ship, the metal, was 133 degrees, and the humidity was 88%. So on that day, the wet bulb was 141. We actually couldn't operate the winches and the lifts and everything that day, so we had to shut down operations. But I do remember another day, it might have been this day with this picture taken where I looked like I came out of the shower in my camis. I drank 13 liters of water without using the restroom once. So, a lot of water, a lot of sweat. And then after that, there was a ship that got hijacked, the PFC Anderson, and it was a ro-ro ship. It's a ship that they drive vehicles onto. And so that ship had been hijacked, and so they started putting Marines on each ship. So I actually came back as a pirate guard. So on the left there, that's with my M16 and some ammunition, and on the right are the guys that came back with me, Tim Armstrong and Dave Renninger. And basically our job was to watch for pirates through the South China Seas and Malaccan Straits with our M16s. And of course we didn't see anybody at all, but that was our job as pirate guards, and we got back to the United States in October. And of course, kind of coming full circle here, commemorating Iwo Jima from 76 years ago, the Marines famous for having their gung-ho pictures. So on the left, you have the gung-ho picture after the flag raising on Iwo Jima, and on the right, this was our gung-ho picture in March in Al Jubail. And we just thought we would take a picture trying to look like we were badass, and we definitely don't compare to those Marines on the left, but they blazed the trail, and they're the ones who led by example that we would have hoped to emulate. But kind of took that gung-ho picture, and this is probably one of my favorite photos I have. Of course, Jessica and Trinity and Sterling are all on the phone, and generations have served. So if you see on the top left, that's my father's grave at Arlington. He was stationed at Moffett Field as a flight engineer during World War II. I always wanted to take a picture with my son in uniform there. Hopefully I'll get to do that with my daughters as well. And then on the right, that's Jessica being commissioned, second lieutenant at UC Santa Barbara. Actually, if you look, we're holding a phone. That's because Sterling was in D.C. at the time, and he's on the phone for the commissioning. The bottom left is Sterling at his boot camp graduation. One of our members, John Hughes, Pearl Harbor survivor, 150 dive bomb missions over Guadalcanal, came to his graduation, and so did Stu Headley on the West Virginia. It's interesting, they were talking about Guadalcanal at the boot camp graduation, and here somebody was there in attendance that was, at Guadalcanal. And then on the right, that's Sterling and Jessica. That's when Sterling was able to pin Jessica's jump wings on her when she graduated jump school at Fort Benning. Marines, we're kind of full of ourselves, kind of proud of ourselves, Marines. I don't know if you guys ever experienced that from a Marine, but I can tell you the pride of being a Marine pales in comparison to the pride of your kids serving. There's just no comparison. And so just so proud of my kids. And finally, this is probably one of my favorite pictures of all time. It's the USS Arizona at the 75th anniversary with the Missouri in the background. That's Woody Williams on the left. That's Wetzel Sanders on the right. Wetzel Sanders told me, "Now, Dwight, there were a lot of boys shooting at that Japanese Zero, but my rounds were going into his engine." He shot down a plane before it could hit the hospital at Hospital Point. A couple of our members that founded the Freedom Committee, Captain Robert E. Thomas and Jack Hammett, were both at the hospital at Hospital Point that morning that he shot down that Japanese Zero. So, it's pretty amazing. This committee might not have ever been founded if Wetzel hadn't have shot down that Japanese Zero, saving Jack Hammett and the other people in the hospital's lives. It passed away from the hospital. And then Woody Williams, Medal of Honor recipient from Iwo Jima, is still alive. His citation reads 4 hours of multiple canister exchanges on flamethrowers to take out 7 Japanese pillboxes so that the trapped Marines could advance. And this picture, it just thinks the beginning of World War II, the end there, the Missouri, and then also the fact that the Missouri participated in the Gulf War. So it just kind of all ties it in. And I'm about at the end of my presentation, but this last two pictures I want to show are pretty powerful. We're losing our World War II generation pretty quickly. We're fortunate we still have Woody Williams. But this last picture is going to show the USS Arizona, and it's going to show the wall inside the antechamber of the memorial. And when you see the wall, it has the names of all the Marines and sailors that were killed, and on the bottom left and right are the ones that have chosen to go back to be buried with their shipmates, to return to their ship. But as you look at it, there's only 2 USS Arizona survivors left, and one of them is Lieutenant Commander Lou Contour, who actually just released a book. So if you look up Lou Contour book, he just has a book that's great that you can look up. But this last picture I wanted to share here kind of is symbolic of the World War II generation and that they're passing on, and I just thought this was powerful. It's Lou standing in front of it, and he's not the only one, there's one other, but someday he won't be standing there either. And as I say back up here at the bottom of this, we always must remember that's what they asked us to do for Pearl Harbor. We never can forget, especially things like the Korean War, where they call it the Forgotten War. We need to always welcome our warriors home, unlike the Vietnam War where they were not welcomed home. So on behalf of me and my family, we'll always remember, we will never forget, we will always welcome home our service members. That's my presentation. Thank you for your time.
All right, thank you, Dwight. Great presentation. If you stop sharing, then we can have some questions. All right, do we have any questions? Everybody unmute yourselves.
Yeah, hey Dwight, that was amazing. That was a historical upper for me. I've seen some pictures, some some history activities about the war, but it wasn't pulled off as eloquently as you had presented. So my hat's off to you and your kids, and I know what the proud feeling is when your children are members of the service too. So that was wonderful. So just turn around and chalk it up on that little American, the United States behind you. But I want to point out one thing. Next time you show the one about how hot it is, yes, the answer should be, it was hot enough to raise a blister on a brick.
That's great.
Hey Dwight, why did you get stuck on all those nice details about loading ships What did your unit do wrong?
It was called last in, last out, and that's a funny story. Mike can back me up on this. We actually landed the 19th or 20th of February, right? We got in there at just before the ground war started. Well, once the ground war ended, they told us, because we had just gotten there, we hadn't gone anywhere or anything, they told us to pack up our stuff and get ready to go back home. We literally had been there just over 8 days or 9 days, and we were packed up to go back home. We would have been some of the first troops back. So can you imagine? There are guys that had only been there for 8 days go back to a hero's welcome when we had only been there a week. Well, somebody found out, and rightfully, they kept us back. And so that set off a whole entire event of us helping clean up everything that was there. So we were the last ones in, we were the last ones out, which was totally fair. We joked that CRC, Combat Replacement Company, actually stood for Can't Return CONUS, because we didn't get back until September, October. It was a long time. But anyhow, it was fair, and we ended up getting Mike, my friend, he actually got all the way to go up and do customs up in all the way up in Iraq, I believe, right, Mike? Didn't you?
Yeah, well, we went into Kuwait City.
Kuwait City.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
we had guys like you when we were leaving Vietnam. Even though I was an MP, there was a big barrel, and they were having guys say the same thing. Last chance, guys. And it was full.
Yeah, and it's true, because I don't know if it was Mike's, in Lonesome Dove they called it. There was a lieutenant colonel that was one of the supreme, the Marines that they really did a great job in the war, and he was going to be promoted to full bird colonel, but he had found one of his Marines, a Lance Corporal or PFC, with the AK-47, and he had a general court martial in front of the whole entire company for this Marine, basically for what he did. Well, we went up doing customs, and not me personally, but some other people went into the van, and they saw the footlocker of the lieutenant colonel, and they said, "You need to open that." And they said, "No, you don't. That's the lieutenant colonel's." No, you do. And they go, "No, you're only a corporal. You can't tell us to do that." And go, "Doesn't matter who we are. You have to open that." Well, they opened that footlocker. It had a false bottom, and he had 3 AK-47s in there. And that lieutenant colonel was kicked out of the Marine Corps. They let him keep his benefits and everything because he had been in the Marine Corps for 23 or 24 years, but he was going to be a full bird colonel and everything else. And they went after him even harder because of how he treated that Lance Corporal. But yeah, that was a pretty amazing story.
That's true.
Dwight? Ronnie Geyer. Two things quickly. Schwarzkopf turned out to be a pretty tall man. You don't see it in the pictures or on TV. We saw him after the Battle of the Ia Drang Valley. He was the advisor and in charge of Dak To Special Forces Camp near the Ia Drang. And they had the last activity of chasing the remnants of the NBA back into Cambodia in November of '65. We saw him at the next operation that we had in the first camp, which was in Bang Son, which was the first full division-sized operation of the war. And he came to visit Hal Moore, our commanding officer, who had himself was a brigade commander, full bird colonel by then. And they talked, and they stood outside for a while. And we thought that Hal Moore was the tallest guy in the area. Schwarzkopf looked like he was about a foot taller. Tallest guy around was Schwarzkopf.
Wow.
I had one quick question on the ship you were on, the Ro-Ro. When I came back from Vietnam, I went into Matson Steamship Lines to and from Hawaii, containers, cars, and eventually Ro-Ro ships. And I was wondering if the Ro-Ro ship you had was a military Ro-Ro ship that you were on, or was it a contracted
Merchant Marine?
Merchant Marine.
Yeah, so the Ro-Ro ship, I was not on a Ro-Ro ship. So the Ro-Ro ship that got hijacked, well, actually that was a military one. It was the PFC Anderson was the name of it. It was a military one. But they didn't allow maritime law. They just didn't have armed people on that ship, even though it was a military ship, right? So I was on the SS Aid, and it was part of the mothball fleet that they used to have in Concord up in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
And so I was on the SS Aid.
you.
I do remember going into my rack there. You know, the quarters were nice. You know, it wasn't like a military ship. You know, there were only 2 of us in this room. It was big. I was like, I asked the people, the merchant marines that were on the ship. I said, "Hey, how come there's seatbelts on the beds?" And they're like, "We'll find out." So we skirted one typhoon that we were walking on the walls as we were walking. I mean, there were 30-foot waves at the sea, so you had to use those seatbelts to hold you in.
Thank you. Really enjoyed your all American presentation today. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Mm-hmm. Best to your son.
Thank you.
Do we have time for one more question?
Just a comment. Bravo Zero. All the best, man. That's outstanding. Marine.
All right, thank you very much.
And your kids, Dwight.
You know, I want to. My buddy Mike King's on the call here, and he has a great saying. I don't know if it's his or somebody else's. Oh no, he says the hours and days go by slowly, but the years and decades go by quickly. And I can't believe it's been 30 years ago today that Mike and I were there in Saudi Arabia. You know, not knowing what was going to happen. You know, thinking for sure we were going to see combat, and you know, thanking God that that didn't happen. You know, each life is precious. 145 lost, but the devastation could have been so much greater. And you know, that was only 16 years after Vietnam. You know, and you know, it's just amazing how fast this time goes. And anyhow, I just appreciate you guys and all that you're, you know, the Walter Ehlers and the Iron Mike Mervoshes and the Scott Williams and the Frank Pangborns and, you know, the George Emersons and the people that went before that led the way for us to follow. And now we've got people following behind us still serving today.
Hey, Dwight, excellent presentation, excellent. Let me ask you one question, real serious question here. Is it true that once a Marine, always a Marine?
Yes.
Oh, that's too bad.
I walked into that one. Hey, Marines aren't always known for being the smartest. That was the front myself. I should have seen that coming.
How hot was it?
Yeah.
What does your daughter say about Grafenbeer?
She's only been there she just got out of quarantine. so she was in quarantine for 10 days. She's just out of quarantine. So she's very looking forward to it. She's traveled the world already. She's fluent in Chinese. She's been to China. She's been to South America, and she's really looking forward to it. Some of the time she spent while she was in quarantine was taking a class about German culture and everything. And so she's really looking forward to being there. And what's the great thing about her position is, you know, Europe's so small, so when she gets leave or on the weekend, she'll be able to go, you know, to other countries. And, you know, it's like driving, you know, to halfway across the state. You can go through here, you can go to 2 or 3 different countries.
I went